A federal judge is addressing the Trump regime's non-compliance with the Epstein transparency law. A federal judge named Judge Engelmeyer issued an order directing Trump's Department of Justice to respond to whether this court, by virtue of its supervision of the protective order, in this case or otherwise, has the authority to rule upon or take action to bring about the Department of Justice's compliance with the act, and they've ordered Trump's DOJ to respond on Friday. You will recall that Democratic Congressmember Ro Khanna and Republican Congressmember Thomas Massie, who were responsible for the discharge petition, they filed a letter brief as amici to this federal judge, Judge Engelmeyer, who is supervising the Ghislaine Maxwell case. Now, interestingly, Judge Engelmeyer, in prior briefing, requested that the Department of Justice explain, this was before the Epstein Transparency Act officially ripened into both the law and the deadline of production, which documents that the DOJ would turn over in connection with the Epstein Transparency Act. And the DOJ listed all of the categories of documents that they promised to the federal judge that they would be turning over. And in status reports to Judge Engelmeyer recently, the Department of Justice is like, well, we've turned over about 12,500 documents or so, and we owe 120, which is 125,000 pages. And we're still going through about 2 million documents, and which that may be 20 million pages. But it's cool, Judge. Like, we're just going through. This is just a gentle status report. We're just letting you know. Now, normally in a case, there would be some sort of adversarial parties, right? But here the DOJ and Ghislaine's positions are kind of aligned. They don't want the release of the files. So who's involved in this case that's going to push the DOJ to do what it said it's going to do when you really don't have an adversarial system anymore, where the number two at the DOJ, Todd Blanche, was basically working with Ghislaine Maxwell when he interviewed her in Tallahassee, and then they transferred her to the minimum security facility in Camp Ryan, Texas, when she lied and gave the Trump regime all those ridiculous sound bites that they wanted, which were then all proven to be false when some of the documents came out from the Epstein estate. So Massie and Khanna sent a letter and say, hey, look, we're writing what's called a Friends of the Court brief. And what we think needs to happen is there needs to be an independent monitor or a special master, or someone needs to be appointed here before you, Judge Engelmeyer, to force them to produce the documents they told you in prior filings that they were going to produce. So it's not even so much about asking the judge on his own to enforce the Epstein Transparency Act as like a first impression issue. You asked the DOJ what they would be turning over. They promised they would turn it over, and they're not turning it over the stuff they said they would turn over. And they claim that 2 million documents are coming, but there has to be some remedy for non-compliance. And so Judge Engelmeyer writes in his order, I've received this letter brief from Khanna and Massie. They asked the court to inter alia, which just means in Latin, among other things, to appoint a special master to facilitate the DOJ's compliance with the act. Counsel for the government and defendant Ghislaine Maxwell were copied on the email attaching this submission. And it goes on to say, the court directs the government to respond by letter publicly filed on the docket. The government's response should address issues implicated by the representatives' motions. These include, but need not be limited to, 1, whether the representatives have standing to participate in this criminal case, including to raise issues concerning the DOJ's compliance with the act that have not been raised in this matter by any party or victim, and 2, whether the court, by virtue of its supervision of the protective order in this case or otherwise, has the authority to rule upon or take action to bring about the DOJ's compliance with the act. The government's response is due Friday, January 16, 2016. Should defendant Ghislaine Maxwell wish to be heard on this matter, any letter from or on behalf of her is due January 16, 2026. Should the representatives wish to file a reply, it is due Tuesday, January 20th, 2026 at 5 p.m. I think no matter what your view of this is, it's good that these issues are now at least raised in a quasi-adversarial process before the judge, because nobody was calling the DOJ out for what they were doing in a court before Khanna and Massey did. Now, if you're wondering, well, why isn't there impeachment or why isn't there criminal action being taken against the DOJ? Well, sadly, the DOJ, they are the prosecutors, but in my view, they've become a racketeering criminal enterprise covering up a child sex trafficking ring by violating the Epstein Transparency Act. So they ain't prosecuting themselves, and our system depends on a DOJ that prosecutes the criminals. But what happens when the criminals are the DOJ? And I don't use that term lightly. They're violating the Epstein Transparency Act. They're engaged in a crime, and all of those who are involved in a criminal enterprise as part of that crime, in my opinion. And so if you look at what Judge Engelmeyer is saying, here's my general view of it. I think that Engelmeyer is skeptical, while he probably wants to rule of an independent monitor. I think he's skeptical of the standing issue of the representatives sending the letter. But I think if you could read through the lines here, he's saying that have not been raised in this matter by any party or victim. Now, obviously, the parties themselves are not going to raise it. The DOJ doesn't want an independent monitor, and Ghislaine doesn't want an independent monitor. That's the way it would normally work, that one of the parties would say independent monitor in a situation like this. But to me, when the judge says or victim, I think that he's inviting, and I could be reading, too much into this. I think he's inviting the victims, the lawyers for the survivors, to say, is this something that you want? Because this is a good issue to raise. I'm not sure if Khanna and Massey have the standing, but they've raised this issue. File it on the public docket. Hint, hint. I haven't seen a victim raise this issue yet. And then he also orders the federal government, whether by virtue, if we can get past that hurdle, by virtue of its supervision of the protective order in this case and other matters, does this court have jurisdiction to ask the government and it asks the government to respond, to comply with its obligations under the Epstein Transparency Act. So, Harry, I still think this was the right move for Khanna, and someone had to bring it up. This needs to be addressed, because if no one has standing under the Epstein Transparency Act, then there's a defect in the act that needs curing, and that needs to be addressed. I think the judge is hinting, I don't know about you guys, good idea. What about a victim? And maybe, so what do you think about it, Harry?
Yeah, you read it deftly and with sophistication. And I think part of what's going on is at a PR level. Standing is always vexing, I think, to both of our, both the Meidas Mighty and the Fed heads, or I think that's how we call ourselves these days. But the notion is, I think, pretty clear from Engelmeyer, a good judge. I clerked with him, by the way, that, it's not, Congress did not give him any power to enforce the Epstein Transparency Act. Let's start, by the way, with the point you've made a couple times in passing. Not the slightest doubt. The Epstein Transparency Act said you have to produce everything. And what's it been now? About a month. And flagrant failures, and in just such, again, a casual, cavalier way. We've done a few different YouTubes in the last couple of days, man, and this has been the common theme. They just really are indifferent. Their operating assumption is we don't have to follow the law. We'll find some reason not to. And the reason in the Epstein Transparency Act is, are you going to make us Congress? That's really what it is. And especially when we have on the bench our big bat, that would be Pam Bondi, who is the one who would have to say we are in contempt or would otherwise charge officials with not doing their duty. That ain't going to happen. So it was a sort of inherent flaw, but not flaw that could have been changed, I think, in the act but it's with a Department of Justice that respected its legal duties, it wouldn't be an issue. They would comply. And as you put it, 125, we're talking about, 5%, under 10% of all the documents they were supposed to do. And of course, not just that, but notwithstanding their continued protestations that, there's so much, we're working as fast as we can. It's very clear they've parceled them out strategically. That first day's harvest of all Bill Clinton stuff, that obviously produced to minimize Trump's role. And I think they're hoping now that they got forced into, Trump got forced into even signing by a near unanimous Congress, that they've got strategies for just trying to gum it up and wait and make people forget and let the air out of the tires. So I think when Khanna and Massey come forward to where a case where something about the Epstein files are pending, it makes sense. And it forces, the department's in a pretty awkward position. I think they will say, and my best guess is Engelmeyer will agree that they don't have standing. But are they just going to bury their heads in the sand and pretend that they haven't completely been derelict in their firm responsibility that everybody in Congress voted to, that they turn over all these materials? It's meant at a minimum to highlight their complete dereliction here. So I think you're going to see Massey and kind of just press in any kind of forum they can. They know that they're in the Congress. They've raised this notion of inherent contempt. Their prospects come up against the majority and the Republican loyalist Speaker of the House, and behind him the loyalist, do whatever you say, boss, Attorney General of the United States. So it's a way to keep, I think, the flames from being extinguished. It's a few people made the point today with all the outrages that are happening, for example, in Minnesota. Maybe Trump is happy because people aren't talking about Epstein so much. In any event, they do seem to have some delaying strategy, and this at least puts it again in the public eye, has an opinion on it. Maybe the opinion includes some acknowledgement that they sure seem to have violated the law flagrantly. But that, I think, is where Khanna and Massey are headed. As to your point, what about victims? When the first kind of production came out, it was clear that it was so wanting. Victims made the rounds, I think, then of the TV in different places with really good effect. And so anything that gives them another chance to kind of make their case and show how they've really been used one side and up the other, first by Epstein and now by the administration, and that does re-raise the whole set of issues, which they're worried now that the DOJ and administration strategy is to make it just die out from sheer delay and time. And I'll just say that whatever the job was, they had to do it by a month ago. If they couldn't, they should have gone to Congress in advance. But in any event, we know that they're perfectly able, because they did it with Bill Clinton, to call out the stuff that is most damaging to Donald Trump. And that I think it's been purposeful that it hasn't been produced. If nothing else, there has to be much, much more pressure to keep the administration, from just folding up shop and saying, "Oh, we did our best, got to stop now," without getting to the bottom of what I think has to be some pretty incendiary documents. Because why, after all, was Trump so hell-bent on avoiding production in the first place?
Everybody, subscribe to Harry Litman's podcast. It's called Talking Feds. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. Just search on YouTube Talking Feds and subscribe to his Substack. Thanks so much, Harry.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.